For the next 10 minutes, I'd like to make a point or ask him a question with a little bit of time before. Please, if you'd like to start. Or could you say your name and where you're from so we can share your name and we get to know each other a bit better as well?
Timothy Bartell from Oxford. which voted 70% in favour of Remain in the 2016 referendum. You made a start at the end of your talk on citing some resources in Scripture and Christian tradition which can enable us to combat the toxic myths and other tendencies you analyse so well. And I'd like you to carry on with that. What resources in Scripture and Christian tradition can we use in the situation we're in now in the UK? Not just to denounce these toxic myths, but to construct a positive, imaginative, prophetic vision to carry us forward.
Thank you. Okay, so in the book, in one of the chapters, I talk about Pentecost. There are lots of other things that one can draw, but let's just talk about Pentecost just for a few minutes, because I think there's something about Pentecost that I think represents everything that is best about how we envisage the kingdom. That's a critique of where we are now. So in Pentecost, there is unity, but there's unity in diversity. And for me, it's significant that what would have been a metropolitan city, the capital at the time, Jerusalem, that all the pilgrims are travelling to the centre because it's part of what would have been the Jewish Harvest Festival, Feast of Weeks. So people are travelling in and they're coming into a centre, it's a metropolitan centre, much like people come into our large metropolitan centres, like Birmingham or Ireland, an international place. And so within the temple there would have been an understanding that people would have spoken a dominant language, a priestly language. Yet in the context of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, people hear God's revelation to them in their mother tongue, in the diaspora of all the places they come from. I still remember what used to be All Money Whit Sunday. I've been asked to do that reading, and naturally I've guessed I have a stutter. I've worked with it. You never conquer the stutter, like you just learn to work with it. So the fact that I can sit here and give a talk would have seemed impossible to me when I was 12, 13 years old. And I still remember having to give that talk. And not talk, I read from Acts chapter 2, which if you know all the bits where it comes from Mesopotamia and Cappadocia and Pamphylia and Phrygia, I blew it big time. I just went up there and got all of it muddled. And to this day, and I still remind my dad of this, my dad, who was a not very understanding, strong patriarchal Jamaican man, sort of football. Yes. We're not particularly encouraged. But here's the thing. That was a diaspora at the time. People came from all over, and there wasn't an imposition that says that when you're in Jerusalem, do as the Jerusalem do. Or when in the centre, do as everyone else does. It says actually, you're still part of the family, you're still part of the body, even though you're going to go back to the place you came from, and the churches that were planted from that are ones that are very particular. So one of the things that Pentecost gives us is this appreciation for difference, but not difference as in silos. It's difference but still located within the body of Christ in our unified identity in a particular person who is both particular, he was a Judean Jew, who's also universal in terms of his risen state, where two or three are gathered, there is Jesus in that particular cultural mix. I think Pentecost gives us a wonderful paradigm for wrestling with it, and if the truth is, it is a wrestle, because life is always easier under some form of nationalism if you can corral everyone into the same place and pretend that all of us are the same. It's a myth, but it's a myth that is a powerful one. Much harder to work with difference And therefore I know that those places are always hard. It's always hard to live with pluralism, but actually there is something enriching, particularly if we have the ability to see Christ in the other, and not just locate within ourselves.
Right at the back, please.
Hi, it's Liz Maitland from Recovery Assistance Dogs, and I'd just like to say, Anthony, that I did used to have a stutter, and I have completely recovered from it. So, well, hey, there's still hope for you. Okay, I'd just like to ask here if anybody who believes they have had a mental health problem could put their hand up. Because do you remember, back in 1975, just hang on a minute, I'll just let you say this first. Nobody would have put their hand up. Nobody wanted to have it. Now, every day, nowadays, it's the in thing. And, you know, I feel that that's a very unifying thing.
Yeah.
And we can learn from it. And I'd like you to all pray that everybody recognise it's no longer them and us. We all have had a mental health problem. And nobody should be locked up or forced on drugs against their will. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and actually I think that's a great example you give in terms of reminding us that the nostalgia of the past is better, because it's not. It's only better if you come from a secure, powerful position where you've always been secure and powerful. But actually, I remember the days where there were always euphemisms. So I had an aunt who was, quote unquote, sick with her nerves. Basically, she suffered from depression. We never spoke about it. She was pitied. Eventually, her children were taken off her because she was not righted. Another euphemism that sort of comes out of Caribbean culture. Alongside that, we could certainly talk about physical disability and sexuality and various other things. So essentially, this sense that there was a happy past where all of us loved each other more so than we do now only worked if you assumed that we just ignore those things that we never want to talk about. And you're absolutely right, it is within a context. Now, it's not perfect, where there is more openness around living with struggles, and actually sometimes live with struggles that don't get better. So I've got a very, very good friend of mine who suffered from clinical depression since his early 20s, and is on medication. He functions, he's okay. But I think what he carries with him is this sense of, this is never going to get better. But actually, God could heal it, God would. But maybe there are bigger things I need to pray about, he would say. And my ability to live with depression as a middle class, university educated man. That actually all the things we talk about are often also undercut by class as well. So my doctoral supervisor was a brilliant man who was black, a guy called John Hull. But one thing I think John would admit that his ability to adapt and still to work as a professional was because he was an academic, was a professor. If he'd been blind and born in East Bowling and brought up in East Bowling, his life thing would have been entirely different. He still would have been disabled, but all the other things that come with our complex subjectivity. It's not just one thing, it's how they interact with and how they operate. So yeah, I have this stutter. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I want to be cured from it. If I'm honest with you, I think it's part of my character trait. Actually, I think having it means that I'm very deliberate about how I place my words and how I speak, because that's how you learn to cope. Trust me, if I didn't have it, I was speaking all type of godless crap. I will do that already, but it would be much more amplified if it wasn't there. So that's part of who I am. It's part of who I am, and God loves us for all the bits that are with us. And sometimes we want to transcend them, and sometimes whatever Paul's thorn in the flesh was, it's stuff that we have to struggle with and live with. But God loves us regardless.
Please.
Morning, my name's Catherine. I'm currently working in North Wales, but I did go to Bradford University. Where are you seeing signs of hope?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen lots of signs of hope, but they're operating at smaller areas. They're operating in sort of ground swell sort of communities. So I go to a very middle class Methodist church in Birmingham called Selly, which is attached to the university, which is full of the middle class thinking male individuals, it has to be said. But actually, one of the things I've really found interesting since we got a new minister who's from Zimbabwe, so our first black minister from Zimbabwe, and actually one of the things that he has done as an outsider, not just to Birmingham, but actually to Britain, I come from Zimbabwe. But again, that complex subjectivity, that he's probably our most educated minister we've ever had, because he's got a PhD from Lancaster and trained in Cambridge. So again, there's lots of interesting intersections about how we see him in different ways. And one of the things that he has therefore challenges us in a church is to begin to create different forms of communities. So we have a project, it's at Woodgate Valley, which is across the A30. That is a predominantly poorer working class area. And we have a project that we have been working with in a number of years. Now, at its worst, is paternalistic white middle class do-gooding. At its worst. But let me put it this way, that's not the worst crime in the world. You know? So the fact that people cross the A38 and we begin to form different types of house groups, different types of class meetings, with individuals who were on the other side of the argument. In order to say, but it's like, so I'll take the exercise I did before. So what do we have in common? Outside of what divides us, what do we have in common? And what we have in common is a commitment to Birmingham. It's a commitment to pluralism. So how are we challenging our own prejudices? How are we being in conversation with each other in order that someone else's story forces me to reevaluate how I understand myself? That actually it's been in that group that's reminded me that a lot of the narrative that I carry around being a marginalised individual, and I think what the person said this morning at the prayers is true, because actually there are different forms of marginalisation. There's a big difference between being on the margins and putting yourself on the margins, because that's where you want to be. There's a whole difference in the world between those two things. And in some respects, I have placed myself there because of the kind of work I do. That's not the same as someone who's stuck there and has no choices. Therefore, being in conversation with someone who is stuck there and have no choice, it just forced me to reevaluate how I think about class. Because if you're familiar with my work, I rarely talk about it. I talk about racial justice. And I talk about myself as a black male who has been discriminated against. But if in my worst moments, I talk about it as if I still live in East Bowling and haven't journeyed. All of us have a root, R-O-O-T, but a root, R-O-U-T-E. And my route has been one that's taken me from working class inner city Bradford into a middle class world where I have a degree of privilege. Let's face it, I'm sitting here talking to you and you're listening to me. Or at least I'm pretending to listen. That's a light years away from my youngest brother, who lives in East Bowling, who no one actually listens to him. Now he's a smart guy, he's an autodidact, he's the kind of person who wouldn't stop talking. As he said to me a few months ago when we were chatting in the pub in Certainly, he said, I like that people can't figure me out. So he drinks beer in his working men's club, watches cage fighting on Sky, and yet takes out 3 or 4 books from his local library every week and loves reading. You can't sum Chris up. That's how it should be for all of us. We can't sum each other up. The part of complex subjectivity is that we can move into different worlds and be different people but still be us.
Very last one. microphone's coming through.
Margaret Byrne, Sister of St. Joseph of Peace from Nottingham. Anthony, thank you very much for what you've given so far. Just want to ask you, what do you say to your friends in the pub in East Bowling to move them on from nostalgia, or do you even attempt that?
It was certainly, it's certainly easier once I start joking about 3 or 4 pints of beer, it has to be said. I think what I say to them is, I say, you know something, there's nothing wrong with nostalgia per se. All of us are shaped by history. Actually, one of the real tragedies, and I mean it in the truest sense, of Alzheimer's is that people lose their memory, they lose their stories. So I'm not saying that our stories are not important. There's something about East Bowling and the stories I can tell about it, and I could go on indefinitely about that. That is part of who I am. I think part of our danger, and a lot of philosophers have done much better work about this than I do, that what often defines us as human beings is, like we talk about walking into the future, and that actually is not true. But what philosophers say is, oftentimes, in terms of this linear time thing, that what we're doing is like we're pointing backwards at the past, and we are inching slowly into the future, walking backwards. That's why change is always hard, because our gaze is always on the world that we come from, and we're slowly making our way into the unknown. Therefore, part of what I try to do with my friends, and this is where I think sort of religious identity is important. That actually, when I talk to that group, like the ones who get it easier, the ones who have some type of religious affiliation, the ones that don't struggle. Because what religion gives us at the best is a type of narrative that helps us to understand that line. At its worst, it is the worst type of tribalism, but at its best, what it gives us is that sense that as we're inching our way in, forward, like, we're not doing it alone, like, we're doing it in the company of God. We're doing it with fellow travellers. So some of what I'm nostalgic about is a mechanism that helped me to transcend that particular world. That world of chapel Methodism is the place that made me into who I am. It wasn't perfect, a very racist church I grew up in, but I still had a sense of belonging. Part of the importance that we can still offer as church, and it's a scandal that everything has moved out of East Bowling, including all the churches. The banks moved out, industry moved out, we moved out as well. Part of what I say is, fine to think about the past. But actually, what is it about now that we can celebrate? And actually, in that group in the pub, all of us have something to celebrate in that particular moment. Even the fact that we're all in the pub itself is significant, because back in the day, the Bradford Arms was a racist, nasty place where, although it was just down the road, like, my dad never went to it. In order to drink, he would walk a few miles past and then go down to the working men's club, called the Railway Club, on the Wakefield Road at A650. So, if only for the fact that that pub has changed, if only for that little moment, that as we sit there drinking and we're nostalgic and there, oh, Brexit, I know. All of us are dying in a way that we would have never been there in the past. Part of what we have to do is to try and share the narrative that says that the past was fantastic, and maybe it was for some people, but it was never as great as we imagined it. But actually, in what way then do we invest that same energy into saying, actually now isn't as bad as we imagined it to be? It is bad, don't get me wrong. Poverty and the need for food banks and the 6th biggest economy in the world is a scandal. There's actually no ducking that. But in some ways, our churches are more socially engaged now than they were 30, 40 years ago. Therefore, I think part of the challenge is to try and share the narrative. Not into some type of Pollyanna, but it's all wonderful really, isn't it? No, it's not wonderful. It is pretty shit for a lot of people. Some of my language, but you know. But let's face that, The reality is worse than the language. But, however, we are here because we care. Our workshop leaders are here because they care. So actually there are things that we can hold on to in the sense in which are making a difference. So finally I would say, just to close, these are not my words, these I want to show that sometimes oftentimes revelation can come from the most unexpected of places. So a number of years ago, when I used to go to Methodist conference a lot, our vice president that year was Sir Michael Checker, who, if anyone had to represent the establishment, it was him. So he turned and was vice president, was utterly unmemorable for as far as I can tell. Just on a very, very different page to where I was. And yet he said this, and I've never forgotten it. He said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, then you've never shared a bed with a mosquito. That's the only thing I can remember from the whole of his vice presidential speech and the year that followed. Don't remember anything he did. But I've never forgotten that. If you share a bed with a mosquito, and I've done it several times in Jamaica and the Caribbean, you know that as tiny as they are, even if they don't bite you, just the idea that they're around stops you from having a comfortable sleep. We have to be in our own selves that mosquito that says that injustice will not sleep so long as we're around buzzing and can take a bite out of it. Thank you.